This is Failing Justice.
Good evening, America. This is Justin Carlson. I am your host, as always, the Failing Justice podcast. I want to welcome you guys to the show. I'm excited. This is a live show. It's my first live show, so I'm pretty excited about that. I just want to forewarn everybody, because it's the first live show. I've got the guys here, these guys at Hello Studios in Dallas, the producers. They, if we have a problem, they're going to come running. But hopefully we don't have any issues. But I am excited, not only because it's live, but I'm extremely excited for my guest tonight. I've thought long and hard about how to introduce him, but I have Richard Miles with me, and Richard is he lives here in the Dallas area. He operates an organization here in the Dallas area. Richard and I, we met 2-3 weeks ago. We met at in Plano, Texas, at the Center for American and International Law. They had a week there for Exoneration Week, and there was a lot of people there. We shared a lot of stories, and Richard was one of the individuals that I met there, and Richard has a special and incredible story. He was exonerated for a murder that he did not commit here in Dallas, Texas, and went to prison for 15 years. And I'm going to let him elaborate on that, especially because I don't want to get anything wrong. And I think just hearing it from him will be, it would be better than me trying to explain it. So without further ado, Richard, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, man, I am super excited, Justin. First and foremost, I'm excited to take this first step, this live podcast.
Yeah, you're with me. Like you're the guinea pig.
Yeah, so we're both leaping out on faith here, but I'm excited. And I when we met a couple of weeks ago, and you talked to me about eventually coming on, I wanted to start out the interview with just thanking you. It's a lot of times, and I spoke about it earlier, one of the things that individuals that's been impacted by wrongful incarceration, one of the things that we look for is accountability and also a conversation, right? And so I've been out going on 15 years now, and I've been blessed to talk with prosecutors, defense attorneys, public defenders, but actual law enforcement, and really talking about, law enforcement was the first point of contact, in our cases, and, grappling with that. But now you've opened this door, man, and you are the first law enforcement officer, a person that's been really willing, I think, to really sit down and have a conversation. And so I pray that your platform is broadened, and that the message gets out and it resonates with the hearts that it's supposed to resonate with. So big kudos to you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. As we were talking off camera just a minute ago, and it's like I told you just a minute, I could just talk to you all day, and I didn't want to get too much into our conversation, but yeah. That saddens me to hear that I'm the first one. While I think that's cool at the same time, it also saddens me. And so, when I saw that training over at CAIL, the Center for American and International Law, I knew I had to go.
Yeah.
I mean, they put on all kinds of great training. I'm not knocking anything else that they do, because they do a lot.
Yes. But
I saw that, and I was like, I have to go to this, because number one, I'm passionate about it.
Yeah.
Number two, I wanted to see how it was presented. So, you had Mark Beach there from Illinois Innocence Project.
Yes.
Which he was a former cop.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that I got to meet him was super cool, because I'm like, oh man, like there's other people out here that are like me.
Yes.
Yes. few and far between, but it was cool to meet him. I mean, and we talked, and him and I had really good conversation, and we connected on a lot of levels. But it just saddens me to hear that I'm the first one that has opened this door, and I hope that with this we can continue to open more doors as we go along. That is my prayer. That is my goal with this podcast, and I said it before. I don't want this to just be a podcast. The Failing Justice is an organization. I mean, it's inception. It's fairly new, but I want it to go further. But listen, enough about me, okay? Listen, I want to listen. I want to hear your story again, and I want I want my audience to hear about it, and then we can start having dialogue after the fact. But just like you told the story at Kell, I want you to tell it. Right here, right now.
Right here, right now.
That's what I want you to do.
Yeah, so
be raw, real, and open.
Right. So, once again, thank you. And to everybody that's streaming in, I hope that you get a jewel out of this evening. So my name is Richard Miles, and I'm the founder, president, and CEO of Miles of Freedom. Miles of Freedom is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is to provide holistic services for individuals, families, and communities impacted by incarceration. We've been doing this for 11 years now, and I've not always sat in the seat as a CEO. I was born and raised in Oak Cliff, Texas, a part of Dallas that a lot of people are familiar with. I have 2 younger brothers and an older sister. I grew up in a household where my father was very, very spiritually rooted and grounded, almost concrete. You could not move him off of his faith. And what came with that was giving it to us. And so I grew up, I jokingly say I grew up under the church. We went to church probably about 40 days out of the week. Every time I turned around, there was a church service going on. But that became an integral piece in my life as things would play out. I went to Lisbon Elementary and eventually went to Longfellow Academy. And up on my high school years, I got accepted in the Skyline High School, which was awesome. Staying in Oak Cliff and then getting a chance to go to Pleasant Grove to attend this awesome high school. I got there, and Justin, it blew my mind. It had every vocation from aviation to child care, and I just dabbled in different vocations, and I fell in love with plastics technology. Plastics technology was the vocation that I eventually got into, and I remember around my 11th grade year, my mom and dad and sisters and brothers jumped in the Astro van, and we headed to TSTC in Waco.
The Astro van.
Yeah, the Astro van, no fifth wheel. But we jumped in the van and we headed to TSTC Waco because this is where graduates of plastics technology eventually went, to get a better understanding of the plastics field. And so I would eventually graduate, and my eyes were solely focused on going to TSTC in Waco and really launching my next level of life. I came out of school in 1993. I finished eventually at a private school. And the summer of 1993, I was working at McDonald's. And I used to work at the McDonald's in Oak Cliff, the McDonald's in Pleasant Grove. I remember back then my main boss was Mr. Roland Parrish. And so as a young person, I'm about 18 or 19 years old. And I tell my mom, I said, man, I finally graduated. I have a job. I want to move out. I want to take this next step of being my own person. Grudgingly, my mom and dad let me go. And I think back now it's because I really didn't have a plan. I didn't have a solid plan. I graduated, I had a job, but I really didn't have a plan that was really laid out. But they let me move out. I eventually moved in with one of the managers at McDonald's, and so my life began outside of my mom's house. Stayed at McDonald's for a while, and I eventually Ended up getting ready to go into a work camp, and it was a job corps that would give you some extra training. So within this year, I left home in 1993. I met a girl named Betty, and Betty stayed in Oak Cliff. So I talking to Betty, I'm visiting Betty, and May 15th, I wake up and I want to go visit Betty because Betty was my girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm staying in North Dallas around this time. I stayed on the corner of Crest Haven and Bluffview. I wake my friend up, James, that's who I stayed with. I say, hey, James, man, can you drive me to Oak Cliff? I want to go visit Betty. Betty stayed in Robin Oaks Apartments, which is over there by Sunnyvale. So he said, okay, I'll drive you over there, but I won't be able to come pick you back up. You got to get your ride back home. No problem. We jumped in the car. Sun was shining and everything, and we head to Robin Oaks Apartments. And I stayed over Robin Oaks Apartments pretty much all day. I remember like it was yesterday. Betty stayed in the front of the apartments. My friend Bo stayed in the back of the apartments. He stayed with his mom. So probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock, I'm about tired. I'm getting ready to go to the house. The buses had stopped running, and I didn't have a car. James wasn't coming back to pick me up. So I walked to the back of the apartments, and I'm over Bo's house. And I'm like, say, Bo, can you drive me home? And Bo's like, I can do that. He said, because my girlfriend stays on University in Roper, and you stay right around the corner from me, so it's not an inconvenience. He charged me $5, by the way. But but it got me to the house. So we jumped in the car, and we left Robin Oaks Apartments. We headed to North Dallas. I remember we made one stop. It was at the 7-Eleven that used to be on the corner of Inwood. I bought me a pack of cigarettes right there, and we left that 7-Eleven, and the next stop we got to was the stop sign of University in Roper. Now, Bo's girlfriend stayed about 2 houses from that corner. And when we got to her house first, I told Bo, I said, well, man, I can walk the rest of the way home. You're at his girlfriend's name was Carla. He said, you're at Carla's house, so you might as well go on and go. He said, you sure? I said, yeah. So I gave him the $5, and I remember getting out the car, and I began to walk up University. And when you're walking up University, you're looking at Love Fair Airports. And when I got to Lemon, I made a right, and I'm walking right in front of the Sewell Cadillac shops. Bluffview is a street that connects Lemon and Lover's Lane. They're both running parallel with each other, and Bluffview connects them. And so I turned down Bluffview because this was way before cell phones. It's a red Coleman that sits on the corner of Lover's Lane and Bluffview, and that red Coleman had a payphone at it. So I stopped at the payphone, called my friend James. It's probably about 2 o'clock now. It's early in the morning, very early in the morning. I told James, I said, James, I'm right here at the red Coleman. Can you cut the alarm off, unlock the door? I'll be at the house in a second. James picks up. We have this very short conversation. I hung up the phone, and as I turned to walk, I noticed a police car was sitting on the corner of Bluffview and Lover's Lane as if it was getting ready to cross the street. Didn't pay any attention to it. About this time, I'm 19 years old. All was in my mind was I had a great day, kicked it with Betty, came to the house, Bo dropped me off, everything is good. As I walked past the police car, I remember looking in but not really paying attention, and the next thing I heard was a helicopter. Didn't really faze me, but then the helicopter gets closer and a light shines, and it doesn't span the area. It's just like, boom, directly on me. I look up, still nothing is registering. I hadn't done, so I didn't take out running. I just kept walking. And immediately, or it seems immediately, multiple police cars came from everywhere. And I'm hearing these commands, get on the ground, get on the ground. So I'm laying on the ground. I remember a police officer came and he put handcuffs on me and he read me my Miranda rights. And they put me in a police car. And when they put me in a police car, they was asking me, where was the gun? Where was the gun? I said, I don't have a gun. What are you talking about? So they put me in the car, and I told them, I said, my friend Bo just dropped me off. He's right around the corner. We can go around there and you can talk to him and say, I don't know what's going on. And say, when we take you downtown, you tell the detective everything you're telling us, where you've been, phone numbers, and you should be all right. When they picked me up from Bluffview and Lover's Lane, they took me to a Texaco. And when I do my presentations, I oftentimes tell people this was one of the first points of error in my case, because what happened was a shooting happened earlier that night. And the Innocence organization proved that it was about 15 minutes prior to me being dropped off on University and Roper by time frame. But the shooting happened at a Texaco across from Bachman Lake. And this club had let out, some young people was milling around. Well, it was about 2021. These people were in a white 300ZX. They had the T-tops off. Somebody came from behind this Texaco and was shooting in the car. They shot and killed the driver and wounded the passenger. This person ran back behind the Texaco. A white Cadillac comes to pick the person up, and they're gone. And so that was the actual crime that happened. When I'm picked up, they took me to this Texaco. Nothing is registering in my head, but when we get there, I'm seeing ambulances. I'm seeing people. It's like guarded off. I see the tape. I see the police cars. And I remember they took me out the back of the police car, and somebody came and they put some stuff on my hand. My hands were still in the handcuffs. I later on found out that there was a gunshot residue test and GSR test. They put me back in the police car and took me to CAPERS, or Crimes Against Persons, which is now UNT Law, ironically. I remember walking into this room, somewhat like the size of this room that we're in, and the detective comes in, and he asked me where I had been that day. And it was a time when we remembered phone numbers.
Yeah, you had to.
You had to. It wasn't getting your phone and pushing a name. I told this detective everything that I had pretty much told you, and I gave him phone numbers. I gave him James' phone number. That was my friend that I stayed with in North Dallas. Betty, that was my girlfriend. Bo, that's who drove me from Oak Cliff to North Dallas. Bo's mom, because we left from Bo's mom's apartment. And Carla, which was Bo's girlfriend. The detective gets all of this information no more than 30 or 40 minutes after my arrest. So there was no way for me to make up a story, call people to tell them to
you're not sending a text.
Yeah,
like, hey, they got me in the room. You know?
None of that. No smoke signals, anything like that. The detective goes out. He gets my information. He did not write my statement down. It wasn't taken down. He stays gone for about 6 or 7 hours, and he come back in. He say, Richard, your story checked out. He say, everybody said that you was with them. He said, but we have a witness that say they saw you kill one person and shoot another person, and you're going to be arraigned for murder and attempted murder. Now, this was the first time that I was even told why I was being picked up. I didn't know anything, And then to hear.
So how long were you into the process whenever you got that information?
It's probably about 6 to 8 hours. Because this was after I told him everything, who I had been with. It was just basic questions. Where you been? Who you? Reiterating these questions over and over again. At no point in time was I ever told that I was arrested for suspicion of a crime or a particular crime. That was not revealed until I got to homicide and after I talked with this particular detective. Hadn't even got a chance to talk to my mom or my dad. That hit me in the gut right there, because I wasn't really understanding what he was saying. I was like, you just said my story checked out, and now I'm getting escorted to Louisville County Jail, where I'm assessed a bond of $350,000. The bond for murder was $200,000. And it was initially attempted murder, but they dropped it down to aggravated assault later on down the line. And it was $150,000 for the attempted murder. And it was no way for us to bond out. I mean, my mom, she was a Head Start school teacher in Oak Cliff. My dad was a disabled veteran. And my dad, he scrapped, so we were the ones that was driving through the neighborhood, digging through your trash, getting the hot water heaters and stuff like that, you know.
Trying to make a dollar.
So we were nowhere close to being financially able to hire counsel. I remember calling my mom. Eventually, it was early that next morning, and telling her to where I was at, and kind of giving her this. It's probably a very broken up story, because I didn't understand a lot myself. And I remember my mom told me that night, she said, Richard, that morning, she said, Richard, we know you're innocent. She didn't say we believe. She said we know. And that set in my core, right? It was as if my mom was saying that spiritually wise, they were walking with me, and they knew that I was innocent. And she said, and we're going to fight this with you. We're going to walk this with you. My dad was a very spiritually guided person. My dad was interesting because he looked at the system based upon his service in the Army, in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force. And I think that because he fought, he believed that there were inalienable rights. One of your podcasts, I think he was reading those rights, and he felt that these rights were afforded to everybody, and especially because he was a man of service. And he would tell me, he said, well, Richard, you know, the scriptures, the truth is going to set you free. We know that you're telling the truth, and it's going to set you free. And the system has court-appointed attorneys, and these attorneys are set up to provide adequate legal counsel. He said, we don't have the money, but you have an attorney, and we're going to work with that attorney. And that began.
So, I mean, he had faith in the system.
He had faith. He had faith in the system.
Supposed to be able to do.
Like we're supposed to have faith in the system, and this began a 17-month journey, because I stayed in the county jail 17 months. May 15th, 1994, I oftentimes say is the day that Richard Ray Miles Jr. died, because everything that I wanted to be ceased when the handcuffs was put on me. Everything that I became after the handcuffs was placed on me was critical in me trying to understand what I was going through. And so whoever I could have been, I don't know, but the impact that I have now is based upon my journey. And so for 17 months, my family and I began this murky walk through the criminal legal system. And I refer to it.
I was hoping you're gonna bring that up. I loved what you said.
Yes.
At Kale.
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no, you go.
I'm really glad you're bringing that up, because I want you to. That's your term, and I think that is super cool, because I've never heard it put the way you're about to put it.
Right.
But it is the most accurate description I think that can be given for the system. So
yes.
Let's talk about that term.
Yes.
I'm glad you're bringing that up.
Yeah. So and it's taken some time for me to really understand and dissect it. And so oftentimes and historically we have said that we have a criminal justice system. And people have hung their hat on that title. But in reality, we have a criminal legal procedure that has processes. And if each process is followed, justice is the outcome. When we put justice in the system, we blindly think that justice will come out of the system. And it's not that justice is in the system, justice is the outcome of every entity doing what they're supposed to do. And that's where a lot of times we fall short. If we had a criminal justice system, then there would not be innocent people in prison, right? We have a criminal legal procedure that should protect innocent people from going to prison, you know. And I think that we have to term it as that, because when we don't, we allow the system to do what it's doing.
Exactly.
And we can't keep allowing the system to do what it do when we've understood that it's not justice within the system. We must make the system be just in our actions. And this epiphany hit me pretty much after I got out, but walking through it, it was hard.
So I know, and we could talk all night about this, but for sake of time, I know we're skipping some things, but
Yeah.
what I want to talk about is your trial, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of error in
Yeah.
your trial, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
on the prosecution side. So I want to touch on your trial, and then I want to
Okay.
touch on the writs that you wrote, because,
Yes.
you know, that was a process.
Mm-hmm.
So what were the errors in your trial? I mean, obviously you found out later,
Right.
or you
right.
didn't know at the time.
Yes.
But
yes.
so talk about that.
Yeah, so I eventually went to jury trial August of 1995. Walked in May 15, 1994. Went to trial August of 1995. Did not make any type of bond or anything like that. And I remember pretty much from the state's side, we had one witness that testified that I was the shooter. Now, this one witness was also amongst 10 witnesses that all saw the shooting. This one witness that testified that I was the shooter was the only witness that was behind the Texaco when the police officers took me to do a GSR test. And so you call that a one-on-one tainted identification, because what they then did, they took all witnesses to homicide and showed them a photographic array lineup, keeping in mind that was tainted because all of the witnesses' description of the shooter was 6'2", 6'4", real dark complected, in which it didn't fit my description at all, so I should not have ever been arrested, and he had on a white tank top. In the photographic lineup, I'm the only picture that had a white tank top on.
And I saw. I wish we had it, and
Yes.
I can put it on the website later, and I'm sure you'll give it to me. But I saw the photo array.
Mm-hmm.
You're literally the only guy with the tank top
With
on.
the tank top.
But the description of the shooter, the guy had a tank top on.
Right, right. And so when you're looking at those pictures, it suggests
Right.
by the array, right? And so the gentleman Marcus was the only person that pointed me out, not by shooting anybody, but by the one-on-one identification process. So that came out in trial. His identification, the gunshot residue test, came out in trial. This was done by Southwest Institute for Forensic Science, and the young lady testified that in the palm of my right hand, they found a level of gunshot residue. Only in the palm of my right hand, nowhere else. Well, number one, I'm left-handed, and number two, I had never shot a gun before in my life. Fast forward, now we didn't have money to hire a gunshot residue analyst, and so basically we accepted the state's evidence as being true, and it wasn't true. Fast forward, when the Innocence organization took my case, they got a gunshot residue test analyst that checked the evidence. The young lady that testified in 1994 wrote a signed affidavit stating that my hands were not positive for gunshot residue tests, and so that was false.
Did she say why that changed? Like, I mean,
So it was.
you testify to that and put a man in prison, and then, 15 years later, oh, hey, that's not accurate. I mean,
She puts it on a couple of things. There's an FBI threshold level that your hands are supposed to exceed or something like that, and then she basically boiled it down to, she said, well, I guess it was the way that the questions were asked by the prosecutor. I don't know. The only thing I do know is they were not dirty. They were not dirty for handling a weapon, shooting a weapon, and they didn't even reach the level of, because gunshot residue is made of antimony and barium.
yeah.
And so basically, if kids are playing outside and you do a test on them, or if you light a cigarette, or if you're messing with a battery, your hands will come back screwed because of these different elements that make up gunshot residue, right?
Exactly.
It was our thinking that when they did the gunshot residue test, because I still had the handcuffs on, could the swab have touched the handcuff
And who knows who those handcuffs have been on?
and tainted?
Yeah.
So all of these things, how should a true GSR test?
Not with handcuffs on. I mean, I've swabbed many hands for GSR, and you don't do it with handcuffs on.
So, and I'm standing outside with handcuffs on, and this is when they're doing this test, and so this came out later on. Now, also, my witnesses testified, so all of my alibis came to testify. The description of the shooter that came out that didn't fit mine at all. A young lady who was talking to the men in the car that saw the shooter, and the guy that was shot testified that I did not look like the shooter. There was no gun found. There was fingerprints at the scene of the crime. They were not mine. And all the state had was this one witness in the GSR test.
So let me ask you, there were, I don't want to jump ahead on you. Maybe you're going to touch on this, but one of the things that stood out to me that you told the story of Kel was, talk about the other witnesses that, or the statements that were made.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things you didn't find out till 15 years later.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So we got two things. So the first thing is, interestingly, the 9 witnesses that were there were never called in to testify. So that's the first piece. At the end of the trial, the prosecutor, my lawyer says, hey, Judge, we have 9 people out here that all seen this shooting, and all of them said that this is not the suspect. They wanted to turn their affidavits in, and the judge shot them down because they were hearsay. He said, you should have called them in to testify. So you got 9 people that was there that filled out affidavits but never called in to testify, and the only person they called in to testify was the one witness that was behind the Texaco.
Golly.
Now, fast forward, 13 years later, I'm sitting in jail, in prison on Cofield unit, and Centurion, the Innocence organization, jumped on my case, and they sent my transcripts, and I opened up. One of the first things I did was open up the police records, and the first piece of paper that I see, and this is in 2007, is a phone call memo made to the Dallas Police Department from a young lady who's telling them, I don't know who y'all have locked up, but my boyfriend has been bragging about shooting one person and killing another person last year at Bachman Lake. This is his name. This is who he was with. You all have the wrong person. They had this before I went to jury trial. And to be reading this document that was in the police records after I had been locked up 13 years.
You're sitting in a prison cell reading this.
I'm 13 years in. I'm past direct appeal. I'm past writ of habeas corpus. I'm now doing my time, and to read this document and then to turn the page and to read another document that the individuals that were shot had assault charges pending on them. They had just beat up a guy and pulled a shotgun out on him, but yet and still the prosecutor was saying I was the only person that they had. But the police files were filled with information, exculpatory information, Brady information that they had before trial that had it been introduced, it was no way that I would have been found guilty.
That's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, and at the same time, it was hurtful. And I remember, you know, I had been, that was 13 years in, so what, I'm 24, 25, 19, no, that was more than that.
No, yeah.
30.
You're in your 30s.
I'm 33.
Yeah.
I was 33. And all the time was gone, and it's like, how do you be angry? When it's so many things, I can't be just angry at this person. I'm going to drive myself crazy trying to be angry.
So that's why, while you talk about that, that's one thing that I think you'd already left, and it was at the end where we were doing evaluations, and we all made comment. You know, the room was full of cops, and we all made comment, and it was, you know, about the what we had just heard, you know, learned through the day, and I can't take credit for it. I was thinking it, but one guy in the class, he said, what really sticks out to me, because we heard from, you know, Christine Bunch, who you know, she was convicted of killing her, setting her 3-year-old's bedroom on fire. But what he said was, to hear these stories here today, and for them to be so humble and not angry.
Yeah.
And before we got on camera, I told you, like I was telling you a little bit about my story, right?
Right.
What happened to me just not even compares to what happened to you. And I had to check myself, because I don't want to do what I do out of anger. Right?
Yeah.
But there is, I mean, if we're being candid and open and honest, there is a part of anger, right? I mean, I think you would probably attest to that. At some point, you have to go through the anger stage.
Yes.
And what was just so amazing was to hear your story, to hear Christine's story, and I want you to talk about your dad in a minute, because for you to go through all of those things and to be able to do what you do now, I mean, that's my question. I mean, I know you went through the anger stage. Talk about, you know, where are you at with that now?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to say that my journey can be unpacked in 4 stages: fear, anger, depression, and evolving.
Man, that's good. That's good.
When I went to prison, I was filled with fear because I'm 20 years old. I'd never been there before. And we understand that fear is absent of knowledge, absent of information. We fear what we don't understand. 4 or 5 years within the system, I began to understand what officers to stay away from, what inmates not to deal with, what time to go eat chow. So my knowledge allows fear to move. And now I deal with the anger. My mom could have put the house up. My dad could have did this. Why did the police pick me up anyway? They know I didn't look like the shooter. Why was my lawyer? And if all of these people and entities that I could be angry with, and I couldn't do nothing with this anger. It's just consuming me. I couldn't lash out, because if you lash out, you're going to go to add segregation. I've seen people cut their wrists and commit suicide because they can't control the anger. The anger consumes them, and they fall into this last stage, is depression, because they see no way out. And I attribute me seeing my way out to my upbringing of my mom and my dad, going back to my spiritual foundation and understanding that God doesn't send us through things. Sometimes life does, but God covers us.
Mm-hmm.
The scripture speaks about there is a peace that surpasses all understanding. And there is an innocence in peace. And there is peace in innocence. And I think I covered myself with me being innocent that allowed me to be covered in a peace that didn't allow the weight of oppression to crush me or break me. And when we're doing the right thing in life, when we're doing things from a pure motive, there's an innocence in that. You're not conniving and trying to do it, and it's an innocence that literally covers you. And when other people think that you're being crushed, you're actually just being covered. And for me, for 15 years, I acknowledged that I was covered while I went through this phase. I remember after I got my time, I got a total of 60 years in the Texas Department of Corrections. And I remember one of the hardest things for me to do was sign my name on this statement. Because if you don't sign your name, you can't do appeal. You can't come back on appeal. And so I'm literally handshaking, standing in front of the judge, signing 60 years of my life away for a crime that I did not commit. And I remember going into the holdover and laying on the holdover, the last person in there. And as clear as I'm talking to you, I heard a voice, and it says, everything is going to be all right. I couldn't grab onto that because I just got 60 years. And so what did I grab onto? My mind flipped back to when I was a little kid, and I used to think about the story of Joseph. And it put me in this position of utilizing my faith. We all have faith, but very rarely do we utilize it. It's like a credit card. You build up credit, but when you swipe it, when you're in a situation and you got to swipe it, that cost. What is it going to cost for me to use my faith in this situation? And I read Joseph, and God showed me. It said, you are in a Joseph situation. Everything that happens to you in this prison is going to be beneficial for you when you come out. But you got to get through the prison.
It's like, man, I feel like we could end the podcast there. I mean, like, honestly, like,
yeah,
the things that we go through, man, and somebody put it to me like, you have to go through, especially as believers.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I mean, you know this. My dad's a preacher. I don't know if he's watching right now, but I grew up in church.
Yeah.
And still a believer to this day. And it sounds cliche, but like, man, when you're in the middle of whatever it is, you just want, like, why me?
Mm-hmm.
Why now?
Right.
Look at all these other people.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And then when you come out of it, whenever that may be, and in your case, it was 15 years, but when you come out of it, you see.
Yeah.
With such a different lens and 4K vision, like, okay, that's why I had to go through what I went through.
Right, right.
And it's so hard, like you said, it's hard to grab onto that in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nearly impossible, honestly.
It is.
And, so I love the way that you put that, because, and that could be one of the questions I have here, and I'm just kind of forget these questions that I wrote down. I'm just, we're just talking.
Right.
But one of the questions that I do know that I have in my notes is, if somebody else is going through this, think about somebody that is sitting in prison right now. Who knows? They may not ever hear this. They may hear it, but just family members.
Yeah.
If somebody's hearing this right now and they know that they have a family member in prison for
Yeah.
something that they did not do, what would your advice to them be? Like if you had to give them a piece of advice,
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably could give them a lot, but right off the top of your head, what would that be?
Right off the top of my head, it would be fight with faith, but accept God's will. We have to fight with faith, faith being the ultimate trusting in God, but also accepting God's will, because the system moves slow. If the system moves at all, I have on Cofield unit. I did time with Christopher Scott, Johnny Pinchback, Ricky Wyatt, Andre Courage, Stephen Phillips. It's about 10 or 15 guys on one unit. And that's just one unit. It's estimated that 10% of the prison population is innocent, because it is so easy for people to fall in this trap. And it's so hard to get out. I just seen something recently where the courts of Supreme Courts, I believe, they're pushing this thing where if you're innocent, how are they saying this? They're trying to bar people that are actually innocent from getting out of prison.
I saw that.
They came out with
I made a post about it.
Yeah, it was on you. So
Yeah.
the Anti-Terroristic Death Penalty Act.
Yeah, Clinton signed that
Years ago.
in the 90s, yeah.
And that impacts people that are not even terrorists. I was barred by the Anti-Terroristic Act, and I had to make sure once my direct appeal was denied, Ricky Wyatt, which is another gentleman that was falsely in prison on Cofield unit, helped me file my writ of habeas corpus 1107, and we had to fight against the Anti-Terroristic Death Penalty Act, which puts a 2-year statute of limitation. Well, number one, I wasn't even an attorney. I had no knowledge of the law, but once your direct appeal is denied, you now have to become an attorney. You have to put something into the courts. And so, yes, the courts gets a lot of frivolous briefs, because you have young people down there and older people down there that knows nothing about the law, but just trying to plead their case. And yes.
What was it that Mark Beach said? I can't remember the number, but it was a ridiculous number of, you have to do so many years before an innocent project even touches you.
So for my case, Centurion wrote me back in 97. So Ben Spencer, to say how I got to Centurion, I got to mention Ben Spencer's name. He's been released now pending exoneration. He was released 3 years ago. He did 31 years in prison. And he was the first guy I met on Cofield. And this is how I knew God just really had me covered. First guy I meet, he was cutting her in the barber shop. And I was telling him, my situation. He was like, man, if you're really innocent, you need to write Centurion. Centurion is one of the first nonprofit organizations that work on non-DNA cases. My case is the first non-DNA, no confession case exoneration. Before mine, it was either sexual assault DNA cases, or they had cases where somebody confessed. Ben Spencer gave me the address to Centurion in 1997, and I remember going to my cell that night and sending them a letter, and I got a letter back stating that due to the overwhelming responses of actual innocence, it takes a minimum of 10 years before we're able to really take on somebody's case. And while that may have been heart-wrenching, for me, I'm thinking, well, I trusted in the system, and they gave me 60. And here you have an organization in Princeton that's giving me 10. So I'm going to ride with Princeton.
Yeah.
And guess what?
You're going to ride with the 10.
10 years later, 2007, I wrote them in 97. 2007 is when the big box came into my cell. 2008, they took my case. I walked out of prison in 2009. This was under the tutelage of then District Attorney Craig Watkins that started the Conviction Integrity Unit.
So there were some people from the Conviction Integrity Unit right here in Dallas County at Cale.
Yes.
And I actually ate lunch with one of them. That is a profound. I mean that is you have to have that, but it's it's not everywhere.
Yeah,
it's not.
Hands down. I mean, DA Craig Watkins, former DA Craig Watkins, and now up under Cynthia Garza, she's leading that Conviction Integrity Unit with District Attorney John Crusoe. I mean, to me, when you look at what justice is, justice involves exonerations and expunctions and vindications. Why would the original definition of justice, involve this? Because of the possibility that we, being human, can fail people. And if we, being human, can fail people, then the true act of justice is vindicating, righting that wrong that was done. You cannot stand for justice if you're not willing to right the wrongs you've done.
And we talked about that, right before we went live. One of the questions I asked you was, they got it right eventually.
Yeah.
When I say they, I don't mean, the Dallas Police Department or the the guys that were first on scene, the detectives, the officers. But did you? And I'm sure you're way past this now, man. I'm very, I love your faith. I love where you stand and how humble you are right now. But you never received an apology, nothing like that. I mean, do those guys even still? I mean, did you ever get to talk to them?
No,
nothing like that.
No, I've not spoken. So I take that back. I did. I got an apology. So when I went back to court, the judge that was in the court, which was Judge Andy Chatham at that time, I was convicted in the 282nd court. I remember he apologized, being the judge of the court. Fast forward 2021, I got a chance to sit down and talk with the prosecutor that convicted me, the lead prosecutor, which was it was a great opportunity for me, because it's like I want to heal too. Exonerees, we want to heal too. It's hard to come out of what we came out of and be whole when you haven't been really helped in the way that you need to be helped. When you want the Dallas Police Department to come and say, hey man, we understand we messed up in your case right here. We understand that. We want to do better. How can we do better? When you want that, when you want to feel like that you're really at the table and you're not this illegitimate son of a broken system. That's basically what we sometimes feel. We were not supposed to be in prison, and now by virtue of us being wrongfully incarcerated, we are children of this system, right? But at what point will every entity that's a part of an arrest be at an exoneration? Why is it just the DA there, the courts there, when we know the police department, the investigators, everybody had a hand in this injustice?
Do you remember, I'm drawing a blank on his name, the police chief that was there that day in Plano? Cannot remember his name. But he was a detective at the time in Richardson, back in the, I think it was it late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
And that, were you there for that? I think you were. He was a detective in Richardson, and he basically, the female that was there, and I can't remember her name either, but she was sexually assaulted, and she mistakenly identified the wrong suspect. Okay, and so he went to prison and he didn't do it, and then later DNA came back, and he didn't do it.
Yes.
And so he goes around, that police chief now, and he says, "Hey, I screwed up. I made a mistake. It's hard for me to sit," and he's older now, but he's like, I made a mistake. I really messed up. And he did travel with the exoneree, the person that he put in prison.
Yeah.
He traveled around with him for many years, and they told their story. And the reason I mention that is because, if we could just admit.
Right.
And when I say we, I'm talking about law enforcement. Because your whole situation, 100% started with law enforcement.
It really
I mean, right there on the scene, that's where it began. And there was a lot of things that law enforcement found out that they didn't do anything with.
Correct.
And I just have so many screaming questions like, why was that information not turned over? Hey, we have a statement. This guy's girlfriend called and said he's bragging about killing this guy.
Right. Yeah.
And they have it in their hands, right? And then they don't do anything with it.
And even in the report, it says that whoever took the report said, I have found a case. So it was more than just this lady's it was more than her call. It was the person that got the call even connecting, saying, I have found a case of a person that this fits. But we don't know why it stopped. For me, and this fast forwards to the Richard Miles Act and the interesting journey that took in 2019, to go to Austin and advocate for transparency with evidence, but to look across the aisle and you have detectives and police officers testifying against the Richard Miles Act. For me, it's like before you go to trial, the person that's assumed to be guilty, his attorney, the prosecutors, should all be in a room, and all the evidence, they need to go back and get the police files, because potentially that could have happened.
Yeah.
After the initial investigation was over, that police file is put up, other information was added to it, and nobody went back and said, let's check. My attorney didn't go back. The prosecutor didn't go back. Let me check this police file again to see if any more information has been added. That didn't happen. Or if it did happen, he's been in the county jail 17 months. It's going to take us too much time to drop this case and start all the way back over. Whatever was the reason, it never entered into the courtroom. Hence the outcome of the Richard Miles Act, which just basically asked police officers, investigators, to be transparent during your investigations. And if you come across evidence, be it exculpatory or not exculpatory, make sure it's all turned in and sign your name right here so that we will know that this is true. And if anything comes up, we can come back and ask you. It's building those levels of accountability. You have people in prison, before you make parole, you have to admit to this crime or whatever. You have to show remorse, right?
It's almost like, I mean, the system is making you say you did something that you didn't do.
Right.
And to whose benefit? To their benefit, so they can have a statistic and say, hey, we, look at us, we got a conviction. You know, we got a guilty plea. Or, like, it's just a stat on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm. And you have, so when you look at wrongful convictions, it's two types. You have the type that I went through where, man, I'm innocent, I'm going all the way to trial. You also have the wrongful convictions where a person does not have a clean record.
That
But
makes it worse.
They are arrested for a robbery. They are arrested for a murder or a drug charge, and they can't go sit. They can't allow justice.
Because they're automatically guilty because they've already
automatically-
committed a crime before.
So you're waiting for that prosecutor to come back with 5 years, because even though you're innocent in your head, and they say this in the county jail, man, they was telling me at the age of 19, you better not go in there and do no jury trial. I'm like, this is this is what we're supposed to use. This is a tool. Jury trial is a tool. Don't use that. You have people signing out because they don't want to use the tool that's presented. And so how do we fix the tool? How do we fix the system so that people are willing to use what's presented in front of them instead of copping out and leaving somebody out there that actually did? That's the heinous thing about a wrongful conviction, because you send an innocent person to prison and you still got the guilty person out there.
And that's exactly right, because they're out there committing more crime.
Right.
People are becoming more victims,
Mm-hmm.
more and more victims because of their crimes that they're still out committing because they think they got away with one.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a never-ending cycle.
Mm-hmm. And then you have the victims. I remember in my case, I got found guilty. I remember standing up, and in the back of my, in the back on my left side, you could hear the families of the bereaved and the victims. You could hear the elated feelings of relief, because they are viewing justice, or so they thought, justice being the person being found guilty. On my right side, I can hear my brothers and sisters, my mom, my dad, just gut-wrenching crying because they're viewing an injustice. Fast forward 15 years later, this lady was there. I didn't know she was there. The victim's mom was there. That when I was found guilty, she felt like she had closure. And now 15 years later, just to rip this wound off of this woman that thought the system gave her closure, and now to find out that I wasn't even the person that killed her son.
And that's probably hard for her to accept.
Now
you heard Christine Bunch talk about it.
Right.
That's probably hard for somebody to accept. Like, hey, this person that's been in prison all these years for killing my son.
Yes.
That is one of the chapters in the big book closed for that family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then to sit there and say, hey, that chapter's not correct. We're about to rip it right out of your story. I mean, and
it paralyzes their thoughts, because if you remember the other young lady that was talking about the sexual assault, now that's the guy is Thomas McGowan, very good friend of mine, been exonerated, but she can't get that. DNA has excluded him. Evidence has shown, but that traumatic experience, and now you're telling me I have to accept this?
yeah.
Now I'm going to hold up, and so you have that part where to me it's just incumbent upon our systems that are a part of this criminal legal procedure to do the best that they can do. I'm not saying that we don't need, police officers, or we don't need systems of incarceration, but we need people that's in that space to move from a level of integrity and innocence.
And that's, like, you're stating things just so plainly and honestly and truthfully, because you're exactly right. If we're not doing, I'm a police officer.
Right.
Okay. If I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because my job is very much, not only is my job to implicate somebody, it's also to exclude somebody just the same.
Right.
And I should have no bias It's easy to get tunnel vision. I'll tell you right now, I've done homicide investigations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you name it, from the smallest investigation to the largest investigation. You want to catch somebody,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You want to catch
Mm-hmm.
somebody.
Somebody.
And if you're not careful, you're going to catch the wrong somebody.
Yeah.
And we see the result from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think far too much law enforcement, they get that tunnel vision. And you want to get that arrest.
Yeah.
You know, you want to send it, you want to boost your conviction rating, and all at the expense of somebody else's life and somebody else's freedom. And that's what I told you. I say this so much to people now. It's not just a headline.
Right.
You know, you read the headline of, hey, this person just got out of prison for murder. You know, he did 20 years, he didn't do it.
Right.
You know, they did 15 years, they did 30 years, did 40 years, whatever the number is.
Mm-hmm.
And you read that, you scroll on Facebook and you see it and you're like, well, that sucks, you know.
Yeah.
And you move on. And I think what was so profound for me in meeting some of the exonerees, and I hate to use that term, for being honest. I just feel like it's kind of degrading.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that, but it to me, when I kept hearing people say exonerees, I'm just like, that is like, yeah, that happened to them, but why do we have to use that term? But anyway, meeting these people who have been wrongfully convicted, it's not just a headline. You're sitting right here in front of me, 3 feet away from me. We can reach out, bump fists, just as we did before the show started.
Right.
Like, you are a real person who lost so much of your life. You are a headline.
Yeah.
But it should be so much more than that. And as law enforcement, we've got to look at it at more than just a headline. You're a real person with a family. And there's got to be some change.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, just as I said earlier, it starts with law enforcement. That's where it initially begins.
Yeah.
And law enforcement officers do have the ability to sway a prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
We meet with prosecutors all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes prosecutors are like, oh, yeah, it sounds good. You know,
Yeah.
get it to me. Get the paperwork. We'll get the ball rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you have to think you're dealing with a person, not just a case, not just a number. Even in a homicide, somebody's dead.
Mm-hmm.
You still want, we use the word justice, failing justice.
Right.
You want to bring justice to the situation, to the case, but it has to be all encompassed. It has to be for everybody.
Right. Right.
Because just as we talked about, if we're sitting here locking up the wrong person, the real person's still out there.
Right.
So I do have a question though.
Mm-hmm.
The person that committed that murder, did they catch him?
They so when I got out, no, this was before I got out. The person that is mentioned in this report is they're staying in Florida right now. I do know that the Innocence organization, it was 3 people that was named on this paper. In this paper, the Innocence organization went to talk to the first person that's in Florida. Now, interestingly, this person is about 6'2", 6'4", real dark. This is years later, but his physical description fit that of which all the witnesses said. And I remember Jim McCluskey, which is over the Innocence organization, he went to this person and he was asking him, he said, oh, I know you're looking for me. This is the gentleman. He said, you're talking about that murder in Dallas years ago. He said, man, me and my friends, he implicates the other 2 people that's on this paper. We were there that night. I remember when we left, we got to the house and we seen it on the news and we was like, man, we just left. Well, it was never on the news. My case never wasn't that type of shooting. It was heinous, but it wasn't new. So he put himself there. Fast forward, they went and talked to the other two guys. The other two guys were like, man, we were never there. So right there, the Innocence organization identified conflicting statements between the person that she said did it and the two people that were supposedly with him. All of this was put together in their report and turned over to the department. Who pushes the ball past that, I don't really know.
Yeah.
But what I do know is they found out that this person fit the description way more. I mean, I'm 5'7", 5'8" when I was picked up. You know, I didn't even fit the physical description. So to your point, the detective said it, and the police officer saw it. But I was still arrested, still passed detective, and still eventually led to jury trial. So this person is still, to my knowledge, still out.
And no telling, I mean, over the years, like what that person has done.
Yeah, I don't, you know, so I think they said this club where the age limit was like 23, 24 to get in. I was 19, and so it was, I'd never been to this club, so the other thing is anybody in my case I've never even met, not even the people that are still alive now. I remember seeing the victim's mom just literally on TV, but never, you know, face to face. And so that whole piece of my life is really like this blank place. The only thing I really have is my experience from being in prison and just dealing with that mental stress of going to trial, man, and then people saying I killed somebody, and I don't wish that on nobody. Going to trial and having to prove your innocence, it's
exhausting.
And just thinking about, you know, I told you earlier, each conversation opens a different door that we've closed, but the doors have to open to better help us be advocates. And for me, just thinking back, 6-day jury trial, and you have to prove that you're innocent, and nothing sells more in my trial, nothing sold more in my trial than two things: the gentleman pointing me out and the police officers testifying. Those are the only two things that really sold. The gunshot residue test, it was flaky, but the jurors heard positive.
Mm-hmm.
It was flaky. The description was flaky. But when the police officer said, that's the person who we arrested him and we took him, and that's how society, because society has put so much trust and to a certain degree, rightly so, because you know, to protect and serve, right?
I mean, it's crazy using the word us, we, our,
right,
because I'm back in it. You know, I got out of it,
right.
But our word, the system was built upon our word. Like what we took the oath to tell the truth and take all of our implicit biases and set them to the side,
right,
and do a thorough and proper investigation, no matter where that leads or what that looks like.
Right.
Totally unbiased. And I mean, you see it all the time, like cops planting drugs in people's car. These are real things. Right. And I had my head in the sand, I swear, for like, it wasn't until 2018. Okay, I started law enforcement at 18 years old.
Wow.
Okay, in 2007. So it wasn't until 2018, 11 years later, that I every time I saw these stories, like cop planted evidence or, cop lied about this or took evidence out of the, evidence room, I was just like, that's got to be a mistake. Like, that's like, and I'm afraid that so many law enforcement officers think that way,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't see the things that go on around them.
Right.
Because I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally opened my eyes and things started happening, I started seeing things, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, this is bad. And especially getting out of it, okay? Since getting out of it, it's like I got a new pair of lenses, and I started seeing more and more, and I'm just like, and it's frustrating because that's not why I got into this,
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I started what I started with Failing Justice, because we have got to prevent these kinds of things. And so I have a question about that. Do you think that law enforcement has made steps in the right direction? Do you believe that, or do you, I mean, obviously technology's changed. We've changed. We talk about cases of mistaken identity and how we do photo lineups now. Like, we don't just roll up and roll down the window and say, hey, is this the guy you saw? Like, there have been things that changed. And,
yes.
But I feel like we can do more.
Right. So what I would say is there are the changes, and then there's the culture.
Oh yeah, there it is.
You see
that culture word, man. There it is.
So you have the changes that are great. The third blind sequential law that came into play. The way that you investigate and all of those things. These changes are put in place. But a lot of times the culture is so deep, right? The culture is so...
The thin blue line.
Yeah, and it's abstract. And you cannot do a lot with change until the culture has been reconsidered, right? And really understanding... I remember I was in a meeting once before, and it was a state trooper. And the state trooper was saying when they talk to them, they say violator. So they're pulling over the violator.
Mm-hmm.
You're automatically...
Yeah.
You've automatically labeled, and so you're engaging with this violent. This is not even a person.
Yeah.
At this point, when you hit the red lights, this is a violator.
That's it.
And your mind switches. And so this culture of protect and serve, from the narratives that's put out there, from the mindsets, from the mental modes, from the prejudices, it changes us because the culture has its own identity.
The culture runs deep, man.
It's own identity, and we cannot... You're talking about a person coming to something that will totally change you, and you have to be somebody that is about change, as what this journey that you're going through. It's change. Now, how do you integrate it within the culture?
Well, I'll tell you what, you don't know it yet, Richard, but in 2025, we're going to Austin, and we are going to make sure that what they're doing in Illinois right now with mandating the wrongful conviction training for their cadets.
Yes.
That is my plan for Texas.
Yes.
I plan to take it all the way to Austin.
Yeah.
And advocate for that. And if I have to stand up there, like you said, amongst my peers on the other side, and because this is what I've always said. If you have a problem with what I'm doing, if you have a problem with failing justice, you are part of the problem.
Right.
Period.
Right.
And I'm going to look in the camera when I say it. If you have a problem with failing justice, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Because Not that my organization is just the greatest in the world. That's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm trying to do is prevent. You come from a good family. You lost so much. And I want to prevent the next Richard Miles.
Yeah.
And I say, you know, it's like we are always just one decision away
Mm-hmm.
from the trajectory of our life completely changing.
Yeah.
Whether that's our fault or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is because what happened to you, you've came out on the other side of it. And I mean, look what you're doing now.
Yeah.
I mean, look at your organization. Look at the people that you help. And I know that you're probably thankful for that. And I feel like God's using you, no doubt.
Most definitely.
So I bet it's probably hard to say, I wish I wouldn't have went through that. I mean,
yeah.
how do you feel about that trajectory? I mean, what is your opinion of what happened to you versus where you are now? Because you never know what if you weren't walking down that street, if you didn't have your friend drop you off at that Coleman that night.
Yeah.
Where would you be now?
You know, I'm a firm believer that God is infinite in his wisdom, and I believe that I would be a successful person, but I would not have a lot of impact.
There you go.
It's a lot of people that want to be successful. And I could have been successful in plastics engineering. I loved it. Thermosets, thermoplastics, injection molding, polyurethane, all of that stuff. I could have been successful in that and being a successful businessman and great and not having an impact in my community whatsoever. I think God covered me through what I went through because he needed an impact within our criminal legal system. And at the end of the day, I believe that if God brought me through 15 years of wrongful imprisonment, it's nothing that can stop me now.
Yeah.
And that's not being prideful, that's being fully invested in understanding that God is the one that covered me and he has a plan for me. I'm very cautious on the words that I say because I know that people are sensitive about this subject, but at the same time, as you said, there still should be accountability if we want to get to this place of community, right? Finding those things that are common and bringing unity in it, community.
Because I think at the end of the day, we all want, I mean, I would think, obviously there's bad people in the world. That's just
right.
That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And no profession is exempt from that. I mean, we just had a nurse back home in Tyler, Smith County. I mean, this nurse, he was killing people off in the hospital,
Right.
So I think, and it's one of those cliche things, there are bad apples in every profession.
Right.
There's nothing you're going to be able to do about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think that we all want the same thing. We all want to, I kind of went off on a rant on my show last week. We all want to live in a world where we know things are safe. We know things are right.
Yeah.
We know things are just,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us probably want to go back to the old days, but we can affect change. We can.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest with you. That's what made me so excited about having you on this podcast, is because when two people like you and I come together,
right,
and our goal, I don't care what your political view is, Richard.
right,
I don't care.
mm-hmm.
We can believe in two different things.
Right.
We, two different personal lives, whatever the case may be, religions.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, we have to have some commonality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this system, this criminal, what do you call it?
Criminal legal
legal
system.
Criminal legal system.
Procedure. Yes.
the goal should always be, no matter where the investigation takes you, should always be justice for
That's
the victim
Yes.
and for the suspects.
Yes. Yes.
And like I said, I'm afraid that we want statistics.
Mm-hmm.
We want convictions. We want arrests.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes at the cost of people's freedoms and people's lives.
Right. Right.
I mean, and that is my goal with failing justice. It starts right here.
Yeah.
I'm still a police officer. I'm still in law enforcement. And even after the fact, if I get out again, which is possible, I don't know. I don't know where God's going to lead me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know what my goal is because I've seen too much of it.
Yeah.
And I want to affect change. And I really feel like we can do that. We just have to have unity, commonality.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk about Miles of Freedom before we wrap up.
Right. Yes.
Number one, tell us about it. Okay. I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but not only tell us about it, but what can we do?
Right.
When I say we,
Yes.
the system.
Yes.
What can we do to help you and what you're doing?
Yes. Yes. So, Miles of Freedom is it's my purpose out of my pain. I remember 6 months before I got out, my dad passed away. My dad was one of my greatest advocates in my case. And when you read Ex parte Richard Miles, which is the case citing, it speaks about my dad and the due diligence that we went through in retrieving my records 4 years prior. I met a guy named Aubrey Jones on Cofield, and Mr. Jones was maybe 10 years my senior. And we used to always talk about the prison system and how we would see men get out and get locked back up. And the common thing would be like, man, it was hard out there.
Mm.
And these guys had done 10, 15, 20 years. And when they got out of the system, they got $50. That was all they had to their name. And they were expected to get a job and all of these things. And you was disconnected, and I don't think people really understand what happens when you go to prison. You're totally in a vacuum. Everything about society ceases to exist. And in order for you to be empowered, you have to have particular resources and a community around you when you get out. Whether that community is your family or an organization. For me, upon my release, I was released from prison in 2009. I wasn't exonerated until 2012. So for 2.5 years, I'm like a convicted felon. I had no job. I went back and moved in with my mom, who was still mourning on my dad's loss. The church is kind of going down because my dad was the bishop of the church, and all of these, Dallas has changed. My mom let me move back in with her, and I eventually got a job through one of the ministers at our church, and I worked at Hilton Garden Inn for 2.5 years until I was exonerated, got enrolled in school. But everything that I achieved, it was through the help of somebody else.
Yeah.
And God was like showing me, everybody that walks out of prison is walking in these shoes. What are you going to do? Fast forward, we fought for compensation. There was no compensation given to people coming out of prison. The Dallas exonerees, we began going to Austin, fighting. We were eventually successful and they eventually put a compensation in place. Well, when I got exonerated, they gave me a compensation. And to me, the compensation came from a very dark place. And so it was like, how can I really accept this? Miles of Freedom. Miles of Freedom. It wasn't just to help innocent people coming home from prison, because innocent and guilty people are returning home from prison. and both need assistance. And so for the past 11 years, we've been working with we work with over 2,500 men and women returning home from prison. We're located in South Dallas at the Martin Luther King Center. We provide case management assistance with job interviews, job referrals, housing referrals, anything that a person needs returning home from prison. We have case managers that do that. We have a food pantry that we partner with North Texas Food Bank. We've distributed over 2.5 million pounds of food, not only to people returning home from prison, to Dallas in general.
Yeah.
Our food pantry is no income restriction, no zip code restriction. If you're hungry and you need food, you can come 4 days a week at the Martin Luther King Center and get food. We have a lawn service that provides not only transitional employment for people that's in case management, but also revenue for the Miles of Freedom to be sustainable. At the end of the day, our goal is to provide holistic services for individuals, families, and communities that's struggling with incarceration. And to answer your question as far as what can people do, well, first thing is relevancy right now. North Texas Giving Day is right around the corner.
I
This
saw
is
that.
coming on time. Like, so really not just Miles of Freedom, but any nonprofit organization that's supporting a cause that you care about, take time out during North Texas Giving Day and support. November 18th is our 11th year anniversary. We're going to have it at the Arts District
That's
Mansion.
amazing.
Yeah, 11 years. I mean, and running a nonprofit, that's a whole different story in itself. But 11 years, we have a staff of 12. I have an awesome board of directors. And November 18th at the Arts District Mansion is our 11th year celebration. So you can go to our website, www.milesoffreedom.org. And check out everything that we're doing there. And then finally, I think backing into what this conversation has been about is when you are hit with that level of epiphany about what is justice, then you support the organizations and the causes, support Failing Justice, podcasts and eventually whatever it will manifest to be, support Miles of Freedom, support things that are doing true integrity and works of innocence, meaning you're coming from the heart. When we come, we're coming from the heart.
That's it.
It's nothing that.
Because I tell you, I mean, I had questions here, but then I kind of just.
Yeah.
I mean, we just had conversation.
That's it.
Usually I have notes to kind of guide my show, but
Right.
the fact that we were able to just sit here and come from the heart and talk about, I mean, obviously what happened to you, but also share, my passion.
Yeah.
And that's why I say I think when two people like us come together, it needs to happen more often.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And one thing that I don't like is, and we talked about this before we started too, I don't identify my employer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People can find out where I am now, a police officer, if they want. It's not hard.
Right.
But we should get to the point to where who cares about that? Because what are we in it for?
Right.
Who cares what police department, what sheriff's office, what DA's office, what law enforcement agency or prosecution office that I work for?
Mm-hmm.
Our goal should be justice.
Yeah.
And what's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many people, I talked to somebody this week. It's a guy I've known for a long time. He is he's an officer somewhere. And I said, hey, man, come on the show. We'll have open dialogue. He's like, I'm worried about my position where I work.
Yeah.
And while I understand that, to a degree, I mean, I don't want the guy to come on and lose his job,
Right.
But why does that have to be a fear?
Mm-hmm.
Why should we fear this conversation? Why isn't this popular?
Yeah.
Why have I lost friends because of this? Why do people think I'm crazy?
Yeah.
This stuff exists. This is real. This has to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think there's such a stigma attached to it? You think it's the culture?
It goes back to the culture. I was talking to somebody earlier. It goes back to the culture, and it goes back to this understanding or this thinking that if I say I've done wrong, then in some way I commit to being vulnerable, and my position should not be looked at as a vulnerable. When you think of police officers, law enforcement, there should not be a level of vulnerability. Historically, it's not a vulnerable. It's the
Yeah.
and at the minute or any sign of weakness, and we parallel vulnerability with weakness, but I parallel vulnerability with strength, because you are only strong when you show me where you're vulnerable so I can help you, right? I think that me being strong is showing you my vulnerable spaces so we can help each other. It's the fact that saying we were wrong opens doors to spaces of vulnerability. And we as men, especially in a culture that was men predominantly, we don't want to be vulnerable.
I've said that from the beginning. I tell people this all the time. All the guys that I know that are in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
You're exactly right. You can't show weakness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be that strong, tough, burly person that nothing bothers.
Right.
That's why suicide in law enforcement is through the roof.
Right.
My best friend shot and killed himself in 2017. He was a police officer. And you're right.
Yeah.
I think you don't want to appear vulnerable.
Yeah,
You don't want to appear weak.
Right.
You know, it's hard for law enforcement to admit when they make a mistake.
Right. And that's what so exonerations are spaces of vulnerability in the system. That's why it's swept under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
That's why don't nobody want to talk about it. We are spaces of vulnerability. We are people that was found guilty and spent years and years and years within the system, and don't nobody want to talk about it. And so what happens is we have to get out, put the face on, build our own selves up with the hopes that I will meet Justin and he will be able to sit down and talk with me, and I can now finally connect with an officer, right?
And that goes back to bringing transparent. You mentioned community earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement, the prosecution side, the prisons, they're not very transparent.
Right.
And then when you're not transparent, it completely erodes the trust of the public. And that's why you see so many things on social media, you know, in the newspaper. Law enforcement is under a microscope, and I would say rightfully so, because we have to get to that state of transparency.
Right.
And to be transparent, you have to be vulnerable.
You have to be vulnerable.
And that is something that we have to identify and we have to craft and do better at, because you're right. It runs deep in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that culture makes me so mad.
Yeah.
Man, it does.
But you've created, God has created this platform, and you know, I think when you look at what former District Attorney Craig Watkins did was not the norm. You don't create an integrity unit in the DA's office, but he did it, and you see what happened for that. And so it's the same thing that you've been able to. You're just in the police department. You're in the law enforcement, and so you're entering now this new space that's going to be it's going to bring so much healing. You don't understand, but you'll bring healing to the officers because you have stepped in the place of vulnerability. Let me be vulnerable for you.
Yeah.
You say, you know what, man, I'll let to the side. Somebody has to stand and be a place of vulnerability so that people will understand at the end of the day, we want to do right. If there's no space of vulnerability, then I don't know if you want to be right or want to be wrong. I don't. You're not saying you're not admitting anything. So how do I know that you're not intentionally doing A, B, C, D, and E? The minute somebody says, "Man, yeah, you're right, man. Let's talk about this." Okay, you're open. So yeah, let me open myself up now, right? So now you have two people dialoguing that are both coming from a vulnerable space, and people feel that. They feel it because it's real. It's the inside.
Man, I've enjoyed this, Richard. I really have.
Most definitely. The first live podcast.
First live podcast.
No mistakes. Nobody ran in.
No, man. I'm sitting over here waiting for something to go wrong. But, you know, I think God was watching over this tonight. And man, you inspire the heck out of me. You're a man of faith.
Yes, sir.
Your journey, your story, it's just so inspiring, and I hope people that have watched it tonight and that listen. You know, today was kind of a milestone for my podcast too. Not only because it was live, I got an email earlier, and it said my podcast now has 5,000 downloads. All right. I was like, you know, I'm no Joe Rogan or anything, but like, I mean, that's pretty cool.
That's good.
You know,
that's good. Yes.
And I'll tell you what, sometimes I see people creep up on my social media. Like sometimes it tells you who looks, you know, like on certain platforms, like who looks at your page.
Yeah.
And I see people that disagree with me and that hate my guts looking at my pages. So I'm like, I know the word's getting out there, you know, and I just want to continue fostering, you know, these relationships, bridging the gap, having the community.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so thankful for you coming on tonight, sharing. I know you're a busy man, and you taking the time to be here tonight just means a lot to me. And I look forward to not only our personal relationship, you know, but also our professional relationship and what we can come together and do for justice in the future.
I look for it as well. I look for, you know, good Lord bless and say the same, standing beside you in advocacy in 2025 in Austin. You know,
I know I sprung that on you, but hey, man, I you know, I was going to mention it to you before, but man, I've been thinking seriously about that. When Mark Beach came in and he said, you know, hey, I've been a cop 27 years, and Illinois is the only state that does this. Mm-hmm. I walked up there after his presentation. I said, we about to change that for Texas.
Yeah.
I promise you.
I agree.
It might be a fight.
I agree.
But we're going to change it.
We led the nation with the conviction integrity on it. Yeah. So why not be the innovator? If we the big star, we gotta lead like the big star.
Yeah. Man, Richard, I appreciate it. Fist bump on camera, man. I appreciate anything you want to say before we get out of here.
Oh, I just closed as I began. You know, I appreciate you for this opportunity, this platform. I pray God blesses you and open up doors. And, you know, anybody that needs the assistance of Miles of Freedom, feel free to reach out to us, www.milesoffreedom.org, 214-290-2337. We are willing and able to assist you.
All right, Richard. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you.
This is Failing Justice.